In this video, we're going to do a couple problems that are kind of an extension of what we've been discussing about solving absolute value equations. So if we look at this equation, we have the absolute value of x plus 1 and then plus 2 equals 4. So there are absolute value bars, and so we will eventually be setting up our two equations as we practiced today in class. But what's different about this one is that we have this plus 2. So what we have to do is, before we can actually set up our two equations, we have to cancel out the plus 2. We have to isolate the absolute value. So before you can set up your two equations, you need to have an equation that looks like this. You need to have the absolute value of some quantity. Whatever's inside here we will deal with later, but it's the absolute value of something. That has to be all by itself on one side of the equal sign, and then equals a number. If it looks like that, then we will be able to set up our two equations and solve them as we were doing today. The problem with this one, or what makes this one a little bit different, is that the absolute value is not alone. There's a plus 2 with it. And so the first thing that we need to do is cancel out that plus 2. The way that we cancel it out is we add the opposite. Those cancel out, and then let's look at what we have. 4 plus negative 2 is 2. These have canceled out, and so now we have what we need. We have the absolute value of x plus 1 all by itself over here on the left, and then equals 2. Now we can solve this equation the way we have done with the other examples. We have this quantity, x plus 1, is inside the absolute value. So we need to find the value of x that will make x plus 1 equal to 2, or x plus 1 equal to negative 2. Okay, and now we have these two equations and we can solve them to find our two solutions. So we need to get the x alone. We have to add the opposite, cancel out. 2 plus negative 1 is 1. That'll be one solution to this equation, or we also need to solve this one. If we get the x alone here, again, the process will be the same. We're going to add the opposite, negative 1 to both sides, cancel out. Negative 2 plus negative 1 is negative 3. So the two solutions to this equation are x plus 1, or excuse me, x equals 1, or x equals negative 3. Okay, so just kind of to summarize, in order to set up your two equations, you have to make sure that the absolute value is all by itself, is alone on one side of the equal sign. If it's not alone, like here it was not alone because we had this, plus 2, you have to get rid of that plus 2 first. So in this one, the way that we did it is we added the opposite, minus 2 on both sides. Those cancel out. What you're doing is you're turning this equation into this equation. And so you're changing it into the form of equation that we've been practicing today in class. And so then you can set up one equation here, one equation here, and then you find your two solutions. Okay, so if we take a look here at number 2, we have a similar equation. We have the absolute value of 2x minus 8, but then we also have the minus 3. And so the first thing that we need to do is isolate the absolute value. So we need to isolate the absolute value of 2x minus 8. And the way that we're going to do that is we need to cancel out the minus 3. So we add the opposite, plus 3, to both sides. These cancel out. And so now we have 5 plus 3 on the right, we have 8. So we have the absolute value of 2x minus 8 equals 8. The absolute value is isolated, and so now we can go ahead and set up the two equations. So we have 2x minus 8 equals 8, or 2x minus 8 equals negative 8. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and solve these. So add the opposite, plus 8. These cancel out. We bring down our 2x. On the right, we have 8 plus 8, 16. Divide both sides by 2. Cancel out. So we have our first solution is 16 divided by 2 gives us 8. So the solution to the first equation is x equals 8, And now we need to go ahead and solve our second equation. So again, we add the opposite. We have 2x equals 0. Negative 8 plus 8 gives us 0. And then we divide both sides by 2. And so our second solution is x equals 0. Okay, so our two solutions, we have x equals 8 or x equals 0. So the final process for solving is to solve the two equations that you set up. But what's new about these that we discussed in this video is that the absolute value is not alone on one side of the equal sign. And so if it is not alone, we need to do a little bit of work to isolate the absolute value before we can actually set up the two different equations. Other than that, the majority of this process is the same as what we've been working on. What's new is what you see right up here in red. We have to isolate the absolute value first, and then we can go ahead with the rest of the steps that we've been practicing.